Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to the Energy Transition Dialogues podcast, where every week we take a look at what countries and companies are doing to progress on the energy transition front with a view to meeting the climate goals that have been set and COP 26, 27 and 28 to come goals, and how close really industry and government are, and whether the right steps are being taken and what solutions are being proposed. And today we're going to be discussing, we're zeroing in on financing of green technology. And we always also like to keep an eye on sort of a bit more of an immediate horizon when we're asking these questions and giving our responses. We've seen a lot of 2030, 2040, 2050 targets being set, but we like to look at the coming decade really in these conversations and really zero in on what's realistic and what's being done today and what's succeeding and what's failing. And I'm delighted to be joined by three guests today. Jonathan Blackburn, who's Manager of Partnerships and Transactions at RWE Renewables, based in Texas. Claudia Zuluaga, founder of The Future is 50/50, I believe based in Colombia, if I'm correct, and Mr. Faris Al-Kharousi, who is Principal Business Transformation Consultant at Petroleum Development Oman, here with me in the Gulf. So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us. Faris, perhaps I can go to you first and give you a sort of an overarching big question on whether the industry is really succeeding in drawing in the investment needed into these green technologies. Do you think we're moving fast enough?
Yeah, we had a very exciting announcement just here in local Oman last week, where the 25 gigawatt hydrogen, green hydrogen plant and project was given a final green light in the Al Wasta region here in central Oman near the Duqm port. And that's a fantastic project because it has Kuwaiti investors, it has international technology partners, and the fact that it's gone from a monitoring phase in 2019 to the first stage of realization now is such good news for the country and the region. Yeah.
Jonathan, would you say that green tech finance has taken, has it had a push from the whole macro COVID economic consequence that the world has had in the last 2 years, and of course the repercussions of COVID on the energy price and sector, or have we taken a step back?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen much of a slowdown with the pandemic. If anything, our company targets and really even country targets have accelerated. And, that's purely being driven by economics. Solar and wind, solar especially, is the cheapest source of electricity for most of the world, and in the US, most of the states here as well. And that's just going to win purely on economics.
And I mean, when you talk about renewables, clearly that's come a long way in the last 10 years in terms of economics. Here in the Middle East, great progress on solar, elsewhere in the world, solar and wind. But of course, renewables is just part of the solution, isn't it, to climate mitigation, climate change mitigation. And there are arguments. Faris just mentioned hydrogen is the new kind of buzzword in terms of clean green hydrogen. From a renewables perspective, do you see finance being challenged with more focus on other solutions, and what challenges remain in renewables to be invested into?
For sure, yeah. So what I like about solar and wind, especially on a large scale these days, is that the technology has been proven for decades. It is a very safe investment for for someone, pension fund, insurance company to invest in. Essentially, just provides an annuity for 30 to 40 years. The counterpoint to that is the returns keep getting compressed, right? So our renewables, kind of conventional renewables returns are getting to be fairly compressed, and it's just because of the investment is not that risky. And that's a good thing. And I don't want to kind of discount, we can get probably 70–80% of the way to our decarbonization targets with the technologies that we have today. So really deploying as much renewables as we can has to be a key focus. Now, it's a good point you made that that's not going to get us all the way, all the way where we need to be. And that's when we have to look at other things like green hydrogen you mentioned. That one was really picking up steam towards the end of last year. And with, you know, the security things that are happening in Europe and Ukraine and Russia, making you know, gas almost a national security issue, it has really almost overnight improved the economics of green hydrogen to a point where they're really projected to be at cost parity in many places, and that's, you know, a focus that R2B, we're not the only ones looking at this. Everyone in the industry is hydrogen is the buzzword these days.
Yeah, and of course, you know, cost and scale well, scale is the one way to bring down cost, I should say. And of course, that is done, Claudia, through technology sometimes to an extent. What technologies are being innovated and applied to these solutions. Are we moving fast enough, Claudia, on the invest in new tech front? You know, are there any gaps there that need to be filled, and what can be done or should be done to pour more confident investment into that?
Yeah, well, my view, so I used to live in developed countries and travel the world, and I'm now living in an emerging market. And what I think I see is happening is that we have shifted all the investment to developed countries, and quite a lot of things and developments, new technologies are taking place that are helping the energy transition to help these countries to get where they want to be. I think I personally have a challenge in terms of the targets. 2050 is just too late. I know there are companies, and I'm just going to mention, for instance, Google. They are going head on and really aiming for 2030. But I think the major gap that we see, and this is not just me being here in Colombia, being an emerging market, being the biggest biosphere per square meter, being a strategic country from geographic location, being the door for Latin America, and having so much development. I think the major gap is that the investment is not reaching out to these developing countries. And it's a major problem. I explain why. Because majority of the population of the world is in these developing countries or emerging markets. It's around 70%. And if we are unable to get the investment there, and we are unable to educate these humans that are part of this greater population, they sometimes don't have anything to eat. Nevertheless, talking about the education, they can't afford education. Therefore, having methods and business models and innovative approaches that allow us to shift the investment to these countries is paramount. And the reason being is that energy transition is not going to happen unless we educate all these humans. They don't know how to transition. They don't even appreciate the word of environment. So we need to help them with that investment, not only through green technology, but also through innovative approaches and new business models.
Okay, and I mean, can you give us an example of what a new innovative business approach would be, ideally?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I would love to maybe share why I left Shell, having a wonderful career, and Shell being such an amazing company, and you know, deciding to come to an emerging country that perhaps is not stable. I actually left to come and set up a foundation to democratize solar energy here in Colombia and hopefully in future in South America. And the main reason was because, first of all, location-wise, is spot on is a great opportunity for solar energy. When I talk, I mean, an example about business model or new business models is something that can disrupt what is already happening for a decade. We're getting technologies here that are probably obsolete already in Europe. Here they enter as new technologies. They may not be the best technology ever, and they are very expensive. So in order to democratize and in order to see an acceleration of energy transition, we need to help everyone in the ecosystem. And everyone is manufacturers from Europe who have great technology, but need a better price to enter markets like Colombia. Research institutes, like, for instance, Constance Institute in Germany, they are always ahead of the game in terms of these developments, but they need to penetrate emerging markets. Financing and private investment, even also from public as well, crowdfunding and all of that. We need to really make this a little bit more widely so that they understand why this is important to invest, and not only the traditional investors, but also the normal guy on the corner that also wants to invest, but never those methods of investment have never offered to them. And then finally, education of the local institutions here that will be able to train individuals in order to shift this energy transition. And the consumer, which is perhaps the most important part, because they are the ones that purchase these developments. So that's an example of how a new business model could, through collaboration, could be created and penetrate markets that have no being high on the agenda of this kind of investment or green investment.
That's great. Thank you, Claudia. I mean, that connectivity, the point you make about connectivity, Faiz, just back to you on that. I mean, just simplifying that a bit and just talking about private public sector connectivity, you know, in Oman, for example, where, you know, you have the public sector, obviously, and you have, you know, SMEs, you have private companies that are developing and either hoping to be invested into or to be able to come into the sort of public sector initiatives, if you like, that need the expertise. How far do you think the Gulf is, just widening that question a bit to the Gulf and not just Oman, in terms of this PPP, you know, private sector, public-private partnership model with green, obviously, tech and the green space? Are we seeing enough clarity from policymakers, for example, to attract that private investment? Where do you identify the gaps that still may exist there?
Yeah, so it's kind of a mixed bag, I would say, currently. And what Claudia just shared about the sort of historical investment into developed and developing countries and how they've diverged over time sometimes, it really hit a note to me because there was a report by, I believe it's part of the PwC network on strategy in Middle East, saying that the GCC has approximately $2 trillion worth of green finance opportunities to come in the next 5 to 10 years, and 1 million jobs to be created. And you see policymakers in the region more or less I wouldn't say interested, but focused on flagship projects like the one I mentioned earlier, but elsewhere in the region. And I think that the reason that is because it takes going from being a hydrocarbon-based sort of sector where, you know, drilling oil and gas is predominantly a set of disciplines. And then you have something where, as Jonathan said earlier, solar and wind have been evolved and matured for so long, over 2 decades. But then you have all these new entrants in hydrogen and elsewhere. It becomes a very fragmented marketplace of choices for your portfolio. And that's where policymakers start to stumble because they get pushed from all directions about where they should make strategic decisions making. And they're limited in their choices because these aren't very big countries in the region compared to you know, those in South America, where Claudia in her region of the world. Yeah.
Jonathan, where do you see that, again, as a general question, where is the 5-year investment paradigm track, do you think, for industry, for green tech? Where would you identify the priority on the next 5-year plan, if you like, if you were to be an investor yourself?
Yeah, I think number one, kind of go back to my point on deployment of wind and solar and now battery storage as high a degree as possible. And then two, looking at, what are other sectors that we can then expand into. And, the green hydrogen becomes one where essentially this is a fuel switching regime where, what was, many use cases for fossil natural gas can be switched over to hydrogen, as well as, in the transportation sector, switching over from the use of petroleum and oil products to batteries, right? And those technologies are economic in some cases today, or on the cusp of being economic in the next few years, and that's really where I think that next chunk of deep decarbonization is going to come from.
Yeah, I mean, the battery, you mentioned the battery storage, intermittency issues also around renewables. I mean, that seems to be in a little bit of a sticking point, isn't it? I mean, you had all this progress on, economic solar panels, and that was all, the technology for that, and costs came down. But the storage issue does seem to be taking longer from today's sort of speed of tech point of view. And do you think that is going to kind of make more progress as we go, or are we going to still come up against some restrictions there?
Yeah, I hope that we are able to continue to ride down the cost curve of battery technology in the same way that we've seen that happen with wind and solar. We in the US are deploying just a massive number of utility scale batteries. In Texas alone, I think there's 10 or 20 gigawatts in the queue that are coming online in the next few years. What kind of concerns me are some of the recent events with the pandemic and the situation in Europe that are going to put some pressure on supply chains and on some of the commodities that go into that technology. And I'm concerned that some of the price declines that we have seen and are expecting may start to slow down when with some of the security and supply chain issues we're having.
Yeah, I mean, certainly that it's a huge, supply chain. I mean, as you said, it started in COVID, and now it's being compounded by rising commodities prices and everything else, and inflation. And we have a whole new macroeconomic situation to deal with, which will obviously impact investment and outlooks for priorities there. Claudia, just back to you, and let's talk a bit about COP and the initiatives there. We obviously had COP26 at the end of last year. We have 2 COP meetings coming up in this region, in the Middle East, in the next 2 years. Do you think that COP accelerates this initiative of more investment into green tech? I mean, how important a role are meetings like that playing? We had quite a few companies excluded from the last COP meeting in Glasgow, namely oil and gas companies. Well, not maybe officially excluded, but not welcomed. Are we gathering the right stakeholders at these events to make progress on this messaging that needs to be made?
I think COP26 and the previous versions that have taken place in the decades are certainly helping to just shift the needle a little bit, but it's not enough. I think it is important for us and for the world to see how is the reaction of young versus middle age and old, those that bring traditional approaches, traditional way of thinking, those that don't want to shift so quickly, and then the young pressuring the rest of the world, so to speak, or in those kind of gatherings to say, hey, you need to go faster. And I think that really helps to really understand the discrepancy there is about this kind of energy transition and how fast it goes in some places and how slow it goes in others. So I think it is very important. We certainly have missed key countries, and they are for different reasons. Not so much because they're not welcome, so much because of their own personal decision not to attend. So that is okay, but I think that's changing certainly with the new Biden administration, and who knows what we're going to see with the situation in Ukraine, etc. But I think it is important. It really helps to shift the needle a bit, but it's never enough. One has to carry on generating a collaboration approaches, really following on the decisions that are made in those COPs, to really make sure that they take place. Because if they stay in conversations, that's where the frustration from this young blood takes place or comes from. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think on that point, Jonathan, just back to you. I mean, two things I wanted to put to you there. Do you think that there's enough pressure coming from NGOs or institutional investors onto corporations, let's say like yours even, in terms of any pledges that might be being made? And also, I'd like to talk to you and maybe go to Faris with the same question after that on, measurement. Claudio just referred to that, certification, measurement. Do we have the right tools there to be even measuring how much corporations are doing to encourage investors to put funds in further?
Yeah, I think on your first question, the answer is no. There's not enough pressure. Certainly, we could be doing more, and companies respond to shareholders and external stakeholders. Certainly, we've seen that, and sometimes can be slow. A lot of times can be slow, but that does help. The same way with governments and with policy. By almost any measure, we are not moving at the speed that we need to be moving at, and it is going to take a coordinated, both a policy and a market approach to get us on track to meet, the 1.5 degree target, or perhaps even higher.
Faris, just on the same point, but maybe let's talk a little bit about. Again, the whole carbon credit market offsets argument that, there still isn't international agreement on or a mechanism, let's say. And a lot of people point at that and say, without that, we can't have a hydrogen market in the future. We can't have, a proper sort of international agreements adhered to. And that all, of course, winds back to investors, doesn't it? Because if investors don't believe that everything is going to be carried through, then they're not going to pour their money into it, are they? So how important is it that we reach soon some kind of cohesive measurement and policy on carbon credits, or on something similar to that?
Yeah, I will say that any modern national oil company or IOC that operates in the region has already probably taken into account possible, carbon tax and carbon penalties already when they've put their long-term field development plans into place. I'm pretty sure of that. I can't comment about any one organization. The other thing is, if you listen very closely, as I do, to my, the policymakers here in the region, I think our Minister of Energy said just 2 or 3 weeks ago that these current pledges that are made at COP, which Oman will also be making in Egypt soon, they're open to revisionist pandering as we go along. And there are many policymakers who don't believe the current targets are very sincere in the realities. Because if you look at, and I'll just take one country, I'm not pointing any country out in general, but if you look at the UK's plans after the IPCC released their reports, the Tory government basically was all about shale drilling and exploration and more nuclear plants, which I can understand. Nuclear is great It's also a non-carbon option, but none of it was focused on efficiencies or alternatives as much as most activists and people who want to get off the hydrocarbon train would prefer. So I think what I'm trying to say in a very long roundabout way is that ever since this recent wave of $100 plus barrel has come around, there have been two schools of thought. One school of thought is, oh no, one school of thought is, oh, it's great, it's over $100 barrel, yippee, let's celebrate. The other school of thought is, we don't want this engine to run too hot for too long, because that just puts more onus on accelerating alternatives, that puts more onus on looking to alternatives. And it's an ironic juggling game now. I've never seen that in my lifetime, where policymakers are actually saying that out loud. They usually whisper that behind closed doors, but now they're saying it out loud. Yeah.
But of course, others are also saying that, I mean, of course, $100 oil is not good for consumers, so we can put that away. But even for the producing countries that are making those shifts, the energy transition shift, and in the Gulf here, you have Saudi being a big one that has declared that it is very serious about that. The argument is, well, with good oil revenue, you can fund and finance, as you said, those things, and also you can continue to clean the conventional energy, which CCUS technology, etc., which, whether we like it or not, I think we've learned that from recent history, is oil and gas is here to stay, particularly gas. If we want to make sure that we have energy security throughout the world, and let's learn to clean it as best as we can. And therefore, high prices might be a good thing for the producers who are investing in that. Claudia, I'll go to you for the final comment, I'm afraid, because we've already run out of time. But just on the question of talent and human resources, a lot of this transition, whether it's to have the technology know-how and those who can innovate and come up with the solutions, or even having those in the finance industry who understand what it takes to judge what investments should be made, even from considering whether capital markets are factoring in climate risk as part of their security valuations. From a talent point of view, and perhaps maybe in the developing world as well, is that a challenge, do you think, for the progression on this front?
Not at all. I mean, one would be surprised. Education in developing countries is relatively good and quite compatible with what we see in the UK and other countries as well, US, etc. I think in terms of talent, engineers, data scientists, scientific, all of those, we have a plethora of those. We just need to find the right people for the right kind of job. I will say the major lack of talent is perhaps on the leadership, and it's specifically one type of leadership or skill that a leader probably may have it and doesn't exploit it at all, and is empowerment. And this energy transition requires so much empowerment around the world that we don't have enough of it. And those that have it don't even know how to execute or help the teams and departments and groups and consortiums and teams that need to develop these green technologies and innovate in order to take this energy transition, for this energy transition to take place. So I would say talent gap, empowerment.
Okay, and Jonathan, we'll give you then half a minute to tell us what would be your key word. We've heard empowerment from Claudia. What is the next big priority for green tech?
For me, it's deployment. We have technologies to get us a large part of the way of where we need to get, and so let's deploy them on a massive scale all around the world.
Yeah, at scale is the thing, I think, because people always say lots of pilot projects going on, but we really need to start to just go for it and deploy at scale. Well, thank you very much, Jonathan and Claudia and Faris. I'm afraid we've run out of time very quickly, but thank you for your input today, and have a good remainder of the week, and Ramadan Kareem to those of you who are celebrating.